Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by and welcome to part 2 of the look around the mounted orchids. I'll carry on from where I left off and we'll see how we get on. And that silly little piece I don't think is actually going to grow. It was the piece of the Brassolalia Make that just fell off when I was potting it, and I thought, oh, we'll chuck that on a mount and see if it grows. I don't think it will. It's been sat like that for ages. It did have a couple of roots on it when I mounted it, but yeah, just a bit of fun. It'll either grow or it won't. It's got two choices. Actually, I think that's BC Make, so that's a Brassocatlia. Well, it may be, because quite a lot of the Brassavolas have been reclassified, so anyway, it's maybe growing, maybe not, but it's been sat there doing nothing for quite a while. Right, this next lot's a bit of a mix. This is Miltonia Queen Ann, and it does have a spike. It's only got two buds, but recovering from serious fusarium, and the two latest growths look clean, and one of them's blooming. The other one may follow on a bit later. They are similar sized, but we shall see. This is my tiny Twinkle, so Oncidium Twinkle, but the clone Tiny Twinkle, so it's a miniature really. This has got umpteen new growths and a good root system, no worries, nice plant. Should be a mass blooming later in the year. It was Epidendrum, it's now Dinema polybulbon. And this was, the main plant was sort of ripped apart and all the growths were taken off and replanted, because it's a bushing climbing type plant, and quite a few of these new growths now have sheaths, so I'm expecting some blooms on this sometime down the line. It won't be many, but there will be some, and tiny little delicate blooms, very attractive and very fragrant. No, it's coming on. There's a lot of new growth on that, and you know, extensive roots all over the place, so doing well, that one. I suppose I could say it's recovering, because it was a plant that was sort of ripped apart and started again really, but it's doing okay, no worries. This is my other Orangus. This is Decariana, going to be blooming soon. I've got 5 spikes on that. Two plants mounted on the same mount, but 5 spikes coming on. The buds are green when they form, and then as they age they get their creamy white colour as they head towards actually blue. Even the spurs are showing on the buds now, so that'll be in bloom in a while, but Orangus do tend to be very slow at doing everything, so these spikes have been around a while, but the buds are forming now, so coming on. This is Epidendrum nocturnum. If it does ever get to bloom, which it should do, night scented, but this has a nasty habit of self-pollinating, and last time it bloomed here, it did exactly that. The bloom opened on day 1. I didn't film it or take a picture. When I came out on day 2, the bloom had collapsed. It had self-pollinated, and apparently it's prone to doing that on younger plants. As the plant bushes up and gets stronger and bigger, the blooms may not self-pollinate and last a bit longer. So let's hope that's what this one does. It does a strange thing. It produces the sheath at the terminal end of the cane, and it seems to push out and then stop. And it seems to stop for some considerable time. This one was sitting there for months and months, and I thought it had died back, and then it just suddenly pushed the bud out. So maybe that's what that cane's going to do. But that cane's far larger than anything else, and it does have a stonking new growth pushing up at the moment. And you couldn't really ask for a better root system, you know, on a mount. They're everywhere. They're even round the back. So the plant seems to be doing okay, keeps producing new canes, and maybe it will bloom. And I will capture the bloom this time if it does that, just in case it does its party trick. Dendrobium Hibiki, we've seen this quite a bit. See, now this one got turned upside down from being in a pot, but some of its leaves are starting to turn. Yeah, some aren't, but if you look at these, they've started to turn upwards, so it is, some dendrobiums are capable of twisting their leaves round to point skywards, basically. At the Orchid Society last night, there were 2 of these, one the same as this, but there was a named clone, had really deep purple blooms on it. But it grew differently. And the canes they had quite deep coloration on the canes, akin to the purple flowers basically, and much deeper coloured leaves. But the flowers didn't present themselves very well. They were buried in the plant instead of, you know, forming a cluster outside the boundaries of the plant so that it was fully visible like this one does. So although the blooms were beautiful, quite honestly I prefer this one. The leaves are a nicer colour, they're always nice and green and shiny, and the blooms are attractive and they move away from the plant so that they're very visible. But yeah, a deep purple version of that. It was a named clone basically. I didn't catch the name, but yeah, so there are different versions. Let's have a whiz along the mounted Phalaenopsis. That not all are doing well. Not all is not well with these, let's put it that way. This particular one has got a name. This is Zhengming Brontosaurus, and the latest two leaves are poor, to say the least. And it is now producing a basal plant, which has got a stonking new root coming out. It's not growing very well. It's not doing very well. It's got a poor root system, and even though it's grown one new root with a nice tip and it has another one there, that is not a good root system to support that plant. So it's not doing very well, that one. This one has struggled, but it looks like it may be perking up a bit. The latest leaf's small, but we'll wait and see what the next leaf does, because the roots have extended and grown reasonably well now. I think this one just did a sulky when it got put on the mount, as some of them do. Not all Phalaenopsis are suited to mounts, the same as not all are suited to horticulture. So there are variables. This is a nice little plant, although the new leaf's not as big as it should be. But it's got a nice root system, new ones, extending ones, branched ones, and a nice little set of leaves, all bar the fact that the latest one's a bit small. But I don't worry about that one. It was in bloom back in the winter. That bloom spike may still branch. It's still green, and it looks like those nodes might extend. But if it's green, it's, you know, in my opinion, it's better to leave it on. You know, if the plant's still supporting it, it may branch. Who knows? And the last little one, this one's not doing too bad. This bloomed back in the winter as well. Not bad roots, not brilliant, but not bad. And a nice shape to the little plant. Again, latest leaf a bit small. The old spike from back in the winter I thought might extend, so I left it. But whether it is or isn't, it has produced another one, and that's got 2 or 3 buds on. So yeah, so that's the mounted Phalaenopsis. So you need to go steady. Not all Phalaenopsis will accommodate to a certain type of growing. Some of them just object to water culture and dump their roots, and some of them love it, and it's the same with mounted Phalaenopsis. They don't all take to it. But these ones are getting given that treatment whether they like it or not. Well, this is my other mounted Miltonia, and also a Fusarium recovered plant. This might have to come off the mount because it's the latest 2 growths are large and they're well away from the mount, so I'm now starting to get aerial roots at the base of those growths. Anyway, both of the latest growths actually bloomed. Blooms don't last terribly long, but it forms like a sequential spike. Yeah, so as one bloom fades, it seems that the next one opens. Same here. This one's starting to fade, but it's still got another bud to come. So yeah, Miltonia Queen Ann, that is. And the flowers are attractive, but they don't last long. And as soon as they start to fade, they start looking tatty. And the purple fades to a dull, you know, like a watercolour rather than a, you know, a bright colour with a sheen to it. So anyway, it's recovered, and as soon as it's finished blooming, it should think about some new growths, and we'll see where we go from there. This is my Dendrobium jenkinsii. This had a mass blooming for the first time back in the late spring. I'm hoping to replicate that. The amount of new growth on here is beyond counting. probably 20 or so new growths on that. So and it's regenerated its roots, a lot of them down the base of the mount this time and out the sides. So yeah, replicate the treatment last winter this year and we should get the blooms again in the spring. No reason why not. It grows well for me, this does. The last ones are mainly the bigger stuff now. This is Dendrobium primulinum. Nearly lost this plant twice. Once upon a time I believe this bloomed for me, but it's a distant memory. But this year it's pulled up great guns basically. 3 new canes, one not very large and that has got a terminal leaf. The other 2 may still be growing. Yes, that's still got growth showing, so has that one. So I've got 3 new canes on here now, and what I am more pleased with, which was distinctly lacking, was a reasonable root system. Now this still isn't a brilliant root system, but it's infinitely better than what it ever had before. So this has pushed on well this year, and hopefully next year we should see some blooms. If it's relying on the old canes to bloom, maybe not, but we'll wait and see. I've got a feeling that might even be an autumn bloomer, so there might even be some buds this year. But it's a wait and see. At least I've still got the plant, and this year it's grown on well, so pleased with that one. Good progress from a near dead plant on 2 occasions. Some of these larger dendrobiums are almost impossible to film because you can't get the whole plant in shot. This is Dendrobium hercoglossum. It's got a few more kikis coming on it. Yeah, and up here too. That's good. I mean, it's new plants for somebody else. But this was the one I had trouble with this year, so it's had a setback. It was on its mount a very long time. I've had this plant a long time, and the fans are coming on. I'll sort them out in a minute. They can go off for a bit while they finish off. In fact, do it now. The last thing I need is a draft over my eyes at the moment. Yeah, so this one was set back. It had to be got off its mount because for first time ever, I think, maybe once or twice, the actual cork bark broke down and started to rot. And the moss was old, so all the roots at the back of the plant just disintegrated. So I took it off and put it on the back of the mount, which has good sound bark. So that's what happened to that. I'll be back, somebody at the door. Oh, I'm getting too old to push cars. That was the guy from next door who has allowed my car to go on his drive till it gets collected Monday morning, so I don't have to worry about it being road legal. But yeah, it's a heavy car to push with just 2 of us up the curb onto the drive. Anyway, it's done. That's that out of the way. I've forgotten where I got to. Yeah, so the plant was taken off and remounted. And since it was remounted, it is now getting going with a reasonable root system again. So, I mean, that's going to recover at a reasonable rate. Not too bad at all. It will probably be set back in as much as some of the canes might not reach their full length, which is this in effect. I mean, that one's still growing. But some of these shorter ones, some of them have been terminated by bugs. They've got in there and taken the lead off. And of course, without the lead leaf, the cane stops growing. So a few of these have been damaged enough to stop them growing. So I might not get the bloomings I normally get next year, but there's more than enough older canes on here with gaps that haven't bloomed yet. So we will get some blooms. This is not an early spring bloomer, it's a late spring bloomer, so it's not a true resting type, this one. So, but Dendrobium hercoglossum, this has been a star performer for me over many, many years. It just keeps growing, it just keeps, and even after that setback, it's still growing, still pushing out new growths. So, yeah, doing okay, more blooms. The last bloom spike on this has just been taken off over the last couple of days. So that's been in bloom since, I think, about April time. You know, a few, followed by a mass blooming, followed by a trickle of blooms over a very long period. It's a good plant. Now this is Dendrobium findlayanum, the one that has the peculiar shaped canes. You know, each node forms its own sort of like bulb. The new growths on this are pushing on quite nicely. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So they're starting to make their swellings now, so they're pushing on. There's still growing season left. This one's still growing. That might be a... nope, there's another leaf coming in there. So all 4 of the new growths are still pushing on. So that's still got some growing to do. It did bloom earlier this year, reasonably well. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't do it again next year. So yeah, it's not a bad plant. This is another one of the biggies, Dendrobium fimbriatum. I'll get there in a minute. Even though it's got no tag on it, I know that's what it is because that went to Malvern in bloom, and they always take your tags off and replace them with their own, and then they don't put them back on. So I'm not liable to forget it anyway. It's all the old stuff's down here. This had a lot of blooms, warranted going to Malvern, on most of the leafless canes. By next year, a lot of this growth will probably be leafless, and that's where the blooms are going to be next year. These canes are still all growing. This is this year's growth. They will eventually get enough weight to keel over and become pendulous, but at the moment they're heading for the sky. That's a lot of new growths this year. These will probably carry on into next year and be the following year's blooms. But as it's only just started blooming, I'm not sure about that. I mean, it's definitely got room to bloom on some of these canes that haven't lost their leaves yet because these haven't bloomed. So this may have a 2-year cycle. Yeah, new growths, push on some more the following year and bloom the following year after that. But as I say, it's only just started blooming despite its size, but it's growing well, really well. No terminal leaves on all of these growths, they're all still pushing on. So good stuff. And this is another one that didn't have a very good root system, and quite honestly now it has. That's the best set of roots coming out from those new growths that I think I've seen on this plant. But it seems to survive on a very small root system, that one. But obviously the better the root system, the stronger the plant. So yeah, doing well, that one. Now, this was the Dendrobium aphyllum that Alberto sent me, just a kiki. Albeit a very long kiki. That managed to bloom, and also produced a kiki which I took off and planted up near the base, and this is this year's cane. Whether that will bloom next year or not, I don't know, but I don't see any reason why it shouldn't. But we'll have to wait and see. That kiki is still growing, so that may get a little larger, but the idea with planting the kiki up there is to get growth from the base and actually get some more canes on this one. Starting off as a single cane kiki, I'm quite pleased with the progress there. I would have liked 2 new growths, but one good strong one like that I'll live with. And this one has produced a good root system as well, some of which it's well attached to the mount, and that different coloured moss at the bottom is because there was a predominance of roots in that area with no moss at all, and they weren't hydrating very well, so I added a bit part way through the year. But the roots have gone right up through and out the top, well into the bark, so that's now got a good root system. It's a nice strong plant, albeit you'd have to class it as a young plant. Good, isn't it, when you've got to stand in the lounge to try and get a plant in shot, but some of these long cane dendrobiums do live up to their name. This is glomeratum, and this got treated wrong 2 years on the trot. So I can't remember whether this one ever did bloom. But basically this will be a good use for my new book, my library book. I could look this one up and just double check. But I think not last year, yeah, possibly last year it grew this cane, and it seemed to want to carry on growing in the winter when I was forcing a rest on it. So that hasn't done it a lot of good, basically, because then on checking it shouldn't have been rested. So it won't get this year. This year it's produced this cane, which is strapped to this one to get it to dangle, and this is still growing, this cane. It's got older canes on it. These are still sturdy canes. There is a possibility of some blooms, but I think if it's going to bloom, it'll be on this cane, because that cane's at least 2 years old now. But that's a wait and see. This was another one nearly got lost when I did the resting them on the bedroom windowsill. This one nearly died, just about made it. And then last year, when it started to grow a nice cane, I sort of set it back by trying to rest the flipping thing. So we'll get it right from now on. But, I mean, this is not a bad cane this year, nowhere near as long as this one, but coming on and still growing. So hopefully see some blooms on this cane next year. There's another one with ridiculously long canes. It must be heading up towards a metre here. Now, this was bought in bloom at the RHS show in London. Saw the blooms and thought, I'm having it. And that was blooming on a single cane. The following year it grew this cane, which was absolutely enormous. Actually, that's been damaged. I was going to say I'll have to trim it. It fell off. It's probably where it gets knocked on the shelves as it's getting hung up. But that bloomed on that new cane, and then last year it grew 3 canes, but they were nowhere near as long, but all 3 of them bloomed really well. Now this year it's grown 2 canes, so 1 less than last year, but they're still growing strong, and they are larger and better looking. So in theory, that will have a massive blooms down both of those canes. Dendrobium Nestor is an anosmum cross, so it has the anosmum fragrance, but is a much deeper purple than the anosmum. Again, a nice healthy plant. Chucked out loads of roots this year, and these 2 canes are growing on nicely. They've still got plenty of growing time as well. They'll probably extend another 6 inches before they stop. Does well for me, that one. That's another one with canes a metre long. It's a good job they're pendulous, because if they grew upright I wouldn't be able to accommodate it. Now when this plant arrived, it had all the hallmarks of it had just been ripped off a tree, which is a little disappointing. It was basically a single rhizome with all of these old canes, and the roots had just been chopped. So they were about an inch, inch and a half long, so it had no roots effectively. But it did have a little new growth, and I believe it was this one here. And that grew on quite nicely. Another little new growth started and failed, but this one did actually bloom. And this year I was expecting more than 1 new growth, and I only got 1. But what it has done this year is this. Now that's now a very good root system, and more than enough to support that plant, because a lot of these canes need to come off. You know, these have had it. So that would tidy the plant up a lot and save the plant trying to push energy down dead-end canes, basically. So I think I'll get those trimmed off and tidy the plant up a bit. But there's no reason why this cane shouldn't bloom, no reason at all. It's still growing, so it hasn't finished yet, but it is only 1. And hopefully next year we should get some multiple new growths, because it's now got a root system to support it. So yeah, coming on. And the blooms on anosmum and the Nestor, the cross, smell of raspberries. When you go picking raspberries, it's impossible not to squash a few. And that fresh raspberry smell is what they smell like, and it's gorgeous and quite substantial. It's not one of those you have to get your nose right up to the blooms. It does actually produce a good fragrance. Don't last long. I mean, anosmum blooms, you're looking at 3 weeks. Lucky if you're 4, you know, but around 3 weeks is about average. The cooler it is, the longer they last. But yeah, it's growing on nicely. Well pleased. Right, you've heard me often refer to the big box orchids. Well, this was the reason it was a big box, to get this thing in. This monstrosity. This is Dendrobium chryseum, and it is a monster. Basically, when I got it, this was the plant. From here downwards. So these leaves were on it. These haven't been grown, they were already there. But what it is doing is chucking out kikis all over the place. They're starting to get some viable roots on them now, so some of these can be separated. But on the canes there are a lot of kikis down this end of the plant. But what's far more important on this plant is what's going on up here. Now, this didn't have any new growth on it, and it it was in a sort of stalled state for quite some time, and then little bits of green started to appear, and we now have a bush. There's about 30 new growths on there. What it isn't doing is producing an extensive root system yet. There are some little new roots growing in there at the base of these new growths, but it's not an extensive root system. And given the size of some of the older roots up here, these are little fine roots, so it's still not growing a good root system, but nonetheless it's doing that. So it's not exactly unhappy. That's a massive new growth, and these, you know, these are growing extensively. And luckily, thank goodness, because I was getting a bit worried about this, they are starting to come outwards instead of growing skywards. Because if it grew that size upwards, I would have nowhere to keep it. So these canes have got to start going horizontal, and then as they get longer the weight will pull them down and increase the load down here. But yeah, it's growing well, and hopefully I don't see any reason why some of these older canes shouldn't bloom whenever its time is, which I don't know because I haven't had it long, but we'll wait and see. But a lovely set of top growth on there with very little root support, which does surprise me. But anyway, good stuff.